the personal, he was very keen to get the personal, uh, your own voice in the book. So interesting. So when I was writing the book, I drew from the archaeology, from the culture. It's been well received. People seem to have enjoyed it, which is good to know. So I'll start with some archaeology for you. The picture on the screen now is a Neolithic burial chamber. By Neolithic, we mean Stone Age, a period where they were using stone tools. And this particular burial chamber dates to around 3100 BC. So that's 5,000 years ago. And the key, I'll just go through the basics here, then it'll make more sense. It's 4000 BC that we get the introduction of agriculture into the British Islands. So Wales is obviously part of the British Isles, as is Ireland, what we now call England, Scotland. I mean, the terms Wales, England, Scotland, Ireland are relatively modern political entities. But if we go back 6,000 years ago, the introduction of agriculture is it's the first major change really for society. Prior to agriculture, we were looking at communities that were hunting and gathering for food. So these communities would have moved seasonally, probably in summer months, heading north and west. But with agriculture, several things happen. The first thing is that you start to clear land, you grow crops, and you have animals, domesticated animals within fields or enclosures. So it's the first time in human history that you have the concept of staying in one place, farming that land, and as a result, there are several things that emerge. One is a sense of place. So people start to belong to a specific piece of land. There's also the question, and it's probably loose in the early days, of land ownership. So if you're cultivating the land, you're growing crops, whether that's for your family or community, there has to be some sense of ownership. So this is a major development for humans, isn't it? We belong to this place, we're growing our food here, and the food is for, we're going to say local consumption. It's not, food is certainly not traded over large distances in the early period. So people are growing their own food. The other important thing is by the Neolithic, by 4000 BC, what we call the British Isles are islands. So the end of the last ice age, which would have been about 12,000 years ago, as the ice melts, sea levels rise, and then the British Isles are separated from the European mainland. So that's also crucial because that means agriculture, it actually originates in the Middle East, places like Iraq and Syria, but it comes through Western Europe and then reaches the British Isles 4000 BC. So they have to come by boat across the English Channel or along the Irish Sea. So that's a major factor. Good example for you, we have a domesticated animal here called sheep, and they're not native to the British Isles. So with the introduction of farming, you also have the introduction of non-domestic animals to these islands, which are then farmed. So there's a lot of changes happening, which leads us then to the burial chambers. Now, the burial chambers are communal, which means a lot of people were buried in the burial chamber. It's not for one individual. It's not a chieftain or a prince or a king. It's a community burial chamber. And a lot of things are raised with the burial chambers. They're stone-built structures. So it's like having a stone house with an earthen mound on top of it, covering it. The picture on your screen, Bryn Celli Ddu, is a site on the island of Anglesey, northwest Wales. Really interesting. Firstly, it's in the Irish tradition of tomb building. It's very similar to a site called Newgrange, which is in the Boyne Valley in Ireland. Now, here's where archaeology kicks in. The Irish tombs are slightly earlier by about 500 years, which means almost certainly the tombs of this kind that we see in northwest Wales, people must have migrated from Ireland this way, bringing these new ideas of tomb building with them. Bryn Celli Ddu, interestingly, is aligned to the summer solstice. The entranceway faces east, sunrise on the longest day, which is also what happens in the Irish tombs. So not only have these early farmers built a tomb, which is civil engineering, it would have taken at least 200 people to build one of these tombs. It's also aligned on the longest day of the year. We can only suggest that it has something to do with the agricultural calendar. So that whatever reason they had for aligning the tomb, some of that is lost on us today, obviously. But if you think about these people being early farmers, then the night sky, the rising of the sun, the seasons would have been crucial to their life. You know, the calendar that they would have had would have been the seasons, the stars, sun and the moon. So it makes sense. So it's an interesting site. It's a very, very important site on the island of Anglesey. And as I just mentioned now, in the Irish tradition of building, of tomb building. So there's movements of people across the sea 5,000 years ago. That's what we can gather. People are moving. The other thing with, I'm not sure how many of you will be familiar with Northwest Wales. I'm talking to you this evening from a town called Caernarfon, which is where Prince Charles was invested in 1969 in the castle. It's Northwest Wales, right by the coast. And just opposite us is the island of Anglesey. Now, Anglesey is a relatively flat area, flat island. It's 22 miles across, but 100 miles in diameter. But it's very, very good, even today, agricultural land. So it's low-lying, well-drained, south-facing. So it's always been a good agricultural area. And we have a concentration of archaeological monuments on the island of Anglesey, for sure. The best way to explain that is that's where the best agricultural land was and is, hence people living there in the prehistoric period. Now, to the south of where I live, just to the south of Caernarfon, are the mountains of Snowdonia. In Welsh, we call Snowdonia Eryri. It's a mass of mountains. And this is the key, and it's very simple. The mountains are high, the weather can be bleak, cold and wet. If you're trying to grow crops, corn, wheat, barley, whether it's today or in the prehistoric period, Anglesey's a safer bet. If you're up in the mountains, your crops are likely to fail. So when we have a look at archaeology and place, the physicality also has a huge effect, where the better land is. And up here, very simply, island of Anglesey has a huge concentration of sites, and also the coastal belt, which is the low-lying below the mountains, the better land. I'll move on. Couple of other burial chambers here. On the left is Capel Garmon. That's the plan, the image, as we look. And Capel Garmon, it's near Llanrwst in the Conwy Valley, so just on the eastern edge of the mountains here. And Capel Garmon is an example of what we call a Cotswold 7 tomb, Cotswold 7. And we find these mainly in the southwest of the British Isles. This is a rare example, Capel Garmon, of one of these up in northwest Wales. With the burial chambers in the Neolithic, you do have trends, different styles of tombs. So we're able to define them. Bryn Celli that I showed you is what we call a passage tomb. There's a passageway coming in. The Cotswold 7 tombs have what we call a lateral entrance, an entrance from the side. And what looks like the entrance on the right-hand side are what we call false portals. And they would have been areas where they had rituals and ceremony. So it's a different kind of burial chamber, but the same thing. Neolithic, communal, that's unchanged, but you get these different styles. So what's interesting with Capel Garmon, it's on the eastern side of Snowdonia. The view from the site is looking back over the mountains. It's quite an incredible sight. And you do wonder whether it was located for the view. Now, this is an interesting question because if we go back 5,000 years, we don't really know if folk were concerned with, a great view at your burial site. We don't really know. But if I took any one of you there tomorrow, we would all say the same thing. There are worse places in the world to be buried with that view of the mountains. It does make you wonder, people, there's a lot of commonality. We're more similar than different. All over the world today and throughout history, we're more similar. We're worried about looking after the family, raising the children, what happens after death. There's common themes throughout history. And they're common today and they were common then. So that's an interesting thing with Capel Garmon. But the key thing with this, the majority of those burial chambers are in southwest of the British Isles. This is 200 miles northwest from the bulk. So once again, during prehistory, we're looking at movements of people. So people did move and people shared ideas. I suppose, if you're talking about movements of people, it only takes one person moving to share ideas. Doesn't have to be 200 people moving. Doesn't have to be a whole community moving. And you often wonder, with farming communities, let's say there was 5 or 6 sons and daughters, and son or daughter number 6 feels that they haven't got enough resources. There might be land pressures that mean people move to look for a better life. Could be that simple. Could be. And then, I've jumped. Pentrefan, the image on the right with the large capstone. That's the largest burial chamber in Wales of that style. It's what we call a portal dolmen, where it has a large capstone on a slight angle. Again, communal burial site. It would have been covered by an earthen cairn, stones and soil. So what we're seeing there is just the stone structure. In Welsh, we call these things cromlech. Technically, they're burial chambers. Pentrefan is down in Pembrokeshire, southwest Wales. Now, that's another area. Pembrokeshire is similar to Anglesey. There's a huge concentration of archaeological monuments in a small area. Pembrokeshire is also the source of the blue stones at Stonehenge. So Craig Rhosaffelyn, which is where the rhyolite comes from, is only about 2 miles up the road from this burial chamber. And Garn Goedog, which is where the spotted dolerite comes from, is 3 or 4 miles to the south. Once again, talking about place, Pembrokeshire is obviously an important place in prehistory, and the rhyolite bluestones and the spotted dolerite bluestones, which form the inner circle in Stonehenge, have come from this area in Pembrokeshire, which is quite remarkable. And that would have been around 2000 BC as we enter what we call the Bronze Age. You'll notice now that I'm not giving you many answers here because we don't know what's going on. And when I take people on walks, I do a lot of archaeological walks. I've got 2 things that I tell all my groups. We'll always have more questions than answers. Definitely. It'll be the questions that we ask, not always able to answer them. And then the other thing I say regularly is when I say good question, people will ask a question and say, oh, good question. And that actually means we don't know. I haven't got a clue. So when I say good question, it means, yeah, who knows? Let's move on. More stones. And again, Penrhos Feilw on your left is on the island of Anglesey. And the stone circle at Gors Fawr, once again, is in the southwest in Pembrokeshire. Both these sites are amongst our better known monuments in Wales. And these date to what we call the Bronze Age, where they introduce metal. They start to use metal tools. So they're still farming, it's still an agricultural system, but the introduction of metal tools, in theory, that should make agriculture more efficient, or chopping trees will be easier. So Penrhos Feilw, I'm stood in between the two stones, so they're about 3 meters or 2.5 meters in height, 2.5 to 3 meters in height. We do have pairs of standing stones. So here's the first or the next good question. Why the pair? What's the significance of the two standing stones? One thing that we might say, whether it's a portal, an entrance to something. But the good question is, okay, well, the entrance to what? Isn't it? If you walk through these stones, what's on the other side? If that was the reason. Normally with standing stones like this, they're not usually associated with burials. That's very generally speaking, but they're not burials marked. Now, Gors Fawr is similar to Stonehenge, but it's on a very, very small scale in terms of the height of the stones. I mean, these are about 0.5 meter in height, some of the larger stones. But it does appear at Gors Fawr that there's an alignment with stars or sun and moon. We haven't quite figured it out in the way that we know more about Stonehenge, obviously, but it seems to be that the stones were on some kind of alignment. In other words, the people who built them knew what they were doing. If that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to jump on now because here's the next phase in prehistory. When we enter what we call the Iron Age, which is the introduction of iron tools, and that starts around 700 BC. And it's at this point that society seems to become more centralized. So the Iron Age is loosely what we would call the Celtic period. Celtic, you get the emergence of Celtic art, you get the emergence of tribes, you get the emergence of chiefs, whether they're warlords or, community leaders. And what happens in this period is the emergence of what we call hill forts. So they're like castles in a way. They're defended by stone walls. But if you look at the picture, within the black defensive walls in the center of the hill fort, we've got over 100 buildings. The little circular ones are houses. The more rectangular ones would have been workshops. So in effect, during the Iron Age, we stopped building stone circles, we stopped burying people in burial chambers, and we start to build very proto-urban centres. If we said hilltop villages, but they're defended. At a stretch, you could argue that they're almost the beginnings of towns. They're centres of trade, meeting, administration. My colleague at Bangor University, Kate Waddington, she calls these sites monumental building sites. And by monumental building, what we mean is people are building on a scale probably more than you need for just pure defense. They're building to make a statement. They're defining their community, but the monumental building is exactly the same way as you have classical buildings, for administration, or I'm thinking about Washington or, any of those kind of buildings where you have those classical buildings, they're built to make a statement as well as their functionality. We're looking at potentially at a site like this, could be a population of up to 200 people. We've got at least 30 houses here within those buildings. So if you had 5 people per household, that gives you a population of about 150, doesn't it? And excuse me. Where the folks are stood, that's the actual stone rampart, the actual walls that protect the site. So they're actually stood on what we call a wall walk. So it's a level platform almost on top of the wall for people to stand and defend. And we're looking out to sea there. The little dark area underneath the clouds is actually the island of Anglesey. We're looking over the north coast of Wales. It's built of dry stone walling, so they've utilised the rocks that are on the hilltop. They're not, we're before the Romans here, so they're not using things like concrete yet to hold walls together. It's dry stone walling. But I'm going to agree with Kate. It is on a monumental scale, for sure. So when I take walking groups up here and we discuss the defensive nature of the site, there's no argument, we go, yeah, it's definitely a defensive site. But there's plenty of defenses there. You don't need that much because it's on top of a hill. So the next question is, how much were they engaged with monumental building, making a statement, displaying wealth, power, status, defining the group, defining who has access to these sites? And another thing Kate has said, which I thought was really brilliant, and I'd never really thought of this before. We think of these places as maybe centres of trade. So people are bringing in metal tools and exchanging and trading. That makes sense. But Kate mentioned as well, what if they were also meeting places to find partners from different communities? And I think that's a good point, because obviously you need to find partners from outside your own community for obvious reasons. So these sites may have had a role in introducing people to their partners, which is basic, isn't it? That's basic human. Interesting. Okay. So far, this is what, in Welsh, there's a good word called gwibdaith. It means a quick tour. We're speeding through time. So the Romans arrive in the year 43. That's the age of Christ. And the Romans, it's what we call the Roman conquest. So this has a huge effect. So this is 2,000 years ago, really, isn't it? The Romans. We've had our hill forts, which, we're suggesting now they're early forms of towns. But the Romans do introduce towns in the way that we recognize towns today. The Romans also build a system of roads linking the Roman forts. So when the Roman conquest happens in North Wales, it's in the year 77 AD that it actually happens. We get the next major change. The Romans come in, build a system of Roman forts for the conquest. They link all the Roman forts with Roman roads. And we still use these Roman roads today. So if you drive south from Caernarfon, which is where the Roman fort of Saguntium was, you can see the road right in the centre of the picture there. That's the road heading south from Caernarfon through the mountains. Still the Roman road. So if you drive south out of Caernarfon, you're actually driving on top of the old Roman road. Moridinum, which is the picture on your right, is Carmarthen, which is southwest Wales. So Caernarfon in the northwest, Carmarthen in the southwest, are still major administrative towns today. Here we have what we call a county council, which is the local administration. So our county council in northwest Wales is Gwynedd, Gwynedd. The council look after highways, education. That question, what have the Romans ever done for us? They've actually given us towns that we still live in today. So the county councils, as I said, education, highways, refuse. Within Wales itself, we have, present day now, we have Welsh government in Cardiff. With due elections in 2 years' time. So the Welsh government would be responsible for all these things: health, education, highways. Health is the difference between local administration and national administration, but we don't have tax raising powers in Wales. So if you look at Welsh government, it depends on funding from central government in Westminster in London. Now, Cardiff would be the present, since the 1950s, actually the capital of Wales. That's another Roman town that we live in today. So a lot of towns and roads that we use today, know well today, have their origins in the Roman period. So I guess the argument there is it's not just history and it's interesting. It actually does have an effect. What's also interesting about both Caernarfon and Carmarthen, they're both on major estuaries, river estuaries, which connect to the sea. So this is the other thing. I've not really mentioned this afternoon, but the other thing is Wales being a mountainous country, we rely heavily on connection to the sea. And I think historically and prehistorically, the sea would have been our highway rather than the mountain paths. Probably. And then Saguntium and Moridinum, both Latin names, of course. Okay, how are we doing? We've almost done 45 minutes. Time goes quickly. Shall I do another 10 minutes with you?
I'm fine with that. We would like to probably leave a little bit of time for maybe questions and answers. Yeah, so if you would just keep that in mind, that'd be fine.
Will do. I'll just summarize what I've done, and then we'll open up for some questions.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, this will be a good place to sort of round off. After the Romans, we enter what we call the medieval period, and this is quite crucial for Welsh history. After the Romans leave in 393 AD, we get the emergence of what we call the Welsh princes. And in the medieval period, so you're talking all the way up to the 13th century, these princes, rulers, would have been Welsh, they would have been independent, but the best description for them, I think, would be warlords. They're people who grab power by force, not by consent. Some of them are national heroes, but they gained power through force. None of them were elected. And it does, again, has a huge effect on Wales as a country, because the English conquest, which happens in 1283, this is when the English king, Edward I, defeats Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, Llywelyn the Last, in battle. So historically, 1283 is a very important landmark milestone in Welsh history, because it's the end of the independence princes. And of course, Edward I proclaimed his own son, Edward II, as the Prince of Wales. He'd killed the Welsh prince. And this is, excuse me, this is the reason really today the current Prince of Wales is William, the son of King Charles, who's the heir to the throne. So the tradition of having a Prince of Wales, Charles, of course, was Prince of Wales, wasn't he, before the passing of Elizabeth? This is all down to history and Edward I conquering Wales in 1283 and proclaiming his own son, Edward II, as Prince of Wales. Many of you from the US who visit, I deal a lot with cruise ships that come into North Wales. And I would say, generally speaking, each season, the majority of folks on the cruise ships are from the US. Some Canadians, not so many from South America. They tend to be US, but we've seen a bit more Canadians recently. But the majority of visitors will be extremely interested in the Welsh castles. So places like Carnarvon Castle, Conwy Castle, Beaumaris Castle, and those are sites we visit weekly with visitors. And it's all down to the medieval wars between the Welsh princes originally and the English kings. So I'm going to stop there in terms of me lecturing, and then we can open up and have some questions. Okay, we've had a little bit of a very quick spin through Welsh prehistory up to the medieval period. But one of the things that is a theme to this talk, things are located for reasons. Monuments are built in places for reasons. Castles are built in places for reasons. And my argument would be, if we understand the geography, so where the better agricultural land is, or where the access to the sea is, if you take a step back and look at the actual landscape, a lot of your answers, a lot of your questions are answered by the actual geography and landscape. And then finally, I'm going to say this as an archaeologist, but it is relevant because our road systems, our towns, the castles that people come and visit affect the economy today. So it's more than just being interesting. It actually does have an effect today, or effects today. So I hope that makes sense, folks.
Very good. Very good. That's wonderful. Do we have anyone with any specific questions? I don't quite know how to do this because I can only see so many people at once, or I would say we could all try speaking up and try, remember to unmute yourself. If you have a question or a comment that you want to make to Rhys. To get the ball rolling, Rhys, I'd like to go, if you can go back to, I think it's, no, before 4. Go up back toward the beginning. I was wondering about the burial chambers. Have any of them ever been dug up archaeologically to see, the interiors of any of these mounds that you're talking about?
Yes, good question, Margaret. So a lot of these sites have been excavated. If you look at the image on the screen now, Brincelli, that's actually been renovated. Now, this is one of our biggest challenges. When we look at these monuments, it's only through excavation that we can figure out how long they were in use for and possibly how many people were buried in the chambers. Now that sounds nice and simple until you realise most of the soils up in North Wales are acidic and bones don't survive.
Oh.
On the rare occasion that these things are built on limestone, we can figure out, if it's possible to figure out how many different bodies we may have had. Some of them would have held maybe 50, 60 individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But Margaret, unfortunately for us, certainly in Snowdonia in the hills, the soils are acidic and bones don't survive.
Oh my.
So I've literally, as an archaeologist, I've excavated medieval cemeteries and all you find are the graves, no bones.
Oh my. Oh my.
So obviously with excavating underground, the key question then is preservation, isn't it? If anything survives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also with these monuments, um, over the last centuries, so this is 18th century onwards, with the expansion of agriculture, a lot of these sites were destroyed or the stones reused.
Oh,
So a lot of evidence has been lost.
yeah.
So we come back, Margaret, unfortunately, somewhere like Brincelli, we have no idea how many people were buried there. And we don't really have a sense of how long. Some of the burial chambers were in use for as short periods of 20 years. Some of them were in use for longer periods, like 200
Ooh.
years. And to figure that out, you'd need to find what we call radiocarbon dating. You'd have to find charcoal that would give you a date.
Mm.
So it's really not an exact science. But yeah, many of them, Brincelli's had extensive work on it. So our understanding is reasonable there. There's a lot we can say. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
Can't the dating material be something more than charcoal for different time periods? They'd be looking for stone tools. They'd be looking for possibly iron or potteries, especially when you get more towards medieval.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
you're absolutely right. So we like the Romans as archaeologists for the simple reason they had coins. And if you find a coin, it'll have an emperor on the coin or a
Wow.
date. So the really easy one to do is Roman because the pottery are distinctive and you find coins. So when you excavate a Roman site, there's very little doubt what it is.
Ah.
And you know, if you have enough coins or stylistically from pottery, you can figure out the range. So the lady who asked the question is quite right. Also, coming this way towards the medieval period, you have again coins and you have distinctive pottery styles. So you should be able to say, you know, if you're finding coins belonging to Charles I, you know it's early 17th century. It's when you're dealing in the Bronze Age, you might find metal tools, but apart from the style, there's no way of dating a metal tool.
Oh.
Not really. So you've got these broad things that we don't find iron in the archaeological record before 700 BC. If we go back before 2000 BC, we don't have metal at all. So when we go back to what we call the Neolithic, the Stone Age, you'll have flint tools. So it'll be arrowheads and blades and scrapers. So again, the lady who asked the question there, generally speaking, we can roughly date things stylistically from the kind of tools or the kind of pottery. So we're not completely in the dark, but you have to find something. That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to find something. So on a good day, when we're out excavating, we find things. But many of us, you know, this is common as well. We've been on sites and we're just unlucky and we don't find anything.
Oh my.
You know, to find a coin or find an implement or something, somebody's going to have lost that. So you can be in the wrong bit of the field or the wrong bit of the site and find nothing at all.
Hi, Margaret, it's Susan Mears. And I just wanted to say that 2 years ago in 2022, when the group of us were over in Wales, we went to Bryn Cevy. Is that how you say it? And a few of us actually went inside. That took a lot of courage on my part, but it was very interesting. But there was also a pillar in there, and there was writing on it or some kind of carving. Has that been interpreted, or do we know what it says?
Okay, Susan, you're quite right. At Bryn Celli, there are two separate stones. Inside the chamber, there's a freestanding stone, which is about 1.2 meters in height. And it's not structural.
Oh.
It doesn't hold up the roof or anything. It's freestanding. And the interpretation, we call it the pillar stone. We think that it was placed inside the burial chamber to keep the dead company.
Oh,
In some way, because it's a special, it's the local schist rock. It looks like a fossilized tree, but it's not a fossilized tree. It's the schist rock. But it looks like that stone was selected, placed inside the monument as some kind of company for the dead. Really interesting, Susan.
Well, it is interesting because Annie and I were the two who went in at that point, and Annie is a very spiritually connected person, and she experienced the stone. She embraced it and spent time with it, and she truly experienced that the stone, I can't say spoke to her, but she did feel the vibrations.
Yeah. Well, they've been placed with, put it this way, with loving care, haven't they, by our ancestors. They've been put in for a reason, and they're special. Now, the stone at the center of the monument, which is outside the actual burial chamber, with the carvings on them.
Thank you.
Once again, we don't fully understand what the carvings mean, but they seem to be either to start the process of building the monument or to guard entrances into monuments. So the symbols on these, some of the stones are carved not all.
Mhm.
And they've been carved using stone tools.
Mhm.
So the people carving them obviously did that for a reason. The challenge is for us today to figure out what the reason was.
Mm-hmm.
But you're quite right. You know, if your friend experienced something, well, these folks also experienced something, didn't they? Because they were building something with care, with precision, with an intent to house their ancestors. So we're looking at very, very special monuments,
Yes.
for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one more question, and it's regarding the next slide after this one.
Okay.
Well, actually, two things. The one on the right, Pentra Ifan or something
Yeah.
like that. These we've seen, my husband and I have seen in a couple locations, and are they? They're not burial, I think is what you said, right? They're not for burial, or are they commemorative?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. The burial chambers are for burial.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, I mean, some of the stones have been removed over the centuries, but imagine a house or a room for the dead, and then that's buried underneath the mound.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
burial chambers, which belong to the first farmers, are definitely associated with burials. It's the standing stones here that come at the same time as Stonehenge. It doesn't appear that the standing stones are associated with burials.
Okay.
So they're erected for some other purpose. So again, Margaret, when we've excavated standing stones, you don't find an associated burial.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions. There's a change. Once we start to use metal tools, there seems to be a societal change from communal burials to an emphasis on the individuals. There seems to be cultural shifts happening as we enter the Bronze Age.
Hmm.
Having said that, Stonehenge, the monument of Stonehenge, the Aubrey holes, as they're called, are associated with burials.
Oh.
So it's not simple.
Yeah. No.
Honestly, not. You know, why are these not associated with burials? And I come back, but that's a good question. I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But were they digging around on these two standing stone slides? Was any archaeological digging going around at one point to check for that, or has it?
Not at these. No. Penrhos Feilw have not been excavated. The reason we say normally that they're not associated with burials is some of these standing stones that have been near roads where we've had a road expansion and they have been excavated, we haven't found burials.
Oh, okay.
So we are generalizing, Margaret, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's as good as we get at the moment. The sort of general patterns of what we've got. I see Mark has got his hand up.
Thanks. I'll just, I know it's late, but thanks to you and to Ed and everybody for arranging this. I had a question about Real Gwynedd, the book that you mentioned in 2022, your book. How long did it take you, like how much of your own work and research in terms of years went into that book? Is that your first book?
Right, that's a good question, Mark. So the Real Gwynedd, I've written 4 books in the Welsh language on archaeology of Wales, and it's been done per region: northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. So I've written 4 Welsh language books on archaeology, similar to what I've been discussing today, because we didn't have Welsh language books on archaeology. It just didn't exist. So I was commissioned to write 4 books on the archaeology of Wales, and it seemed to be the most sensible way was to do it in 4 regions: northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. Each book took about 2 years to write, roughly. So with Real Gwynedd, similar story. It's a process of, I would say, roughly 2 years. It's all my own research, and it meant visiting everywhere. So every place that I write about in Real Gwynedd, I visited, spent time at, gathered my thoughts. So that was a process where sometimes you've got to go back to places because you're not always sure what you think. And then you go back on a sunny day or a misty day and it makes more sense. So it's quite a demanding process, Mark. Lots of traveling, lots of time spent with notebooks, and then you've got to get the inspiration then, haven't you, to write.
Put it down.
So it was a really interesting. So I would always try to find something that sparks my imagination, then I could write.
Thank you.
But a good
Thanks.
example, when I was writing Real Gwynedd, there's a little seaside town up here called Abersoch. And the big thing in Abersoch really is that it's full of holiday homes. You know, it's just people coming to the beach. So the culture and the life of that town, you know, there's nothing there in winter. It's only in summer that it comes alive. And I felt that was too obvious a thing to write about because this happens all over the world where you get these holiday villages in effect. And I thought, it's too obvious. And with that particular chapter, that particular town, sorry, I was struggling, you know, I was like, what am I going to write about? But Abersoch means the mouth of the River Soch. It's where the river flows into the sea. And my inspiration was, okay, I'm not going to write about the town. I'm going to follow the river to its source. So I start in Abersoch and I walk the 8 miles along the riverbank to the source of the river. And that was the inspiration for Abersoch. So it's very random. And you just have to find something. Somebody had told me that towards the source of the river gets so narrow you can jump across it. So that became what I wrote about, my quest to see whether you could jump across the river. But then along the way, you're passing churches, you're passing early Christian monuments, you're passing a lot of things that were also included. So yeah, interesting, Mark. When you're writing, you've got to try and find something that maybe no one's looked at before or a different way of looking at things.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I'm so glad I asked this question.
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Well, I think we're at 3:09 now, according to my computer. It's been wonderful, Rhys. I think that we probably, when we sign off with you, we'll come up with other ideas, but it sparks the imagination. I have kin that live in the Gwynedd area, so I pursue getting your book so that I can feel a little bit more like I know that area. And I appreciate the work that you did for the book and also for the time you spent with us here with the Welsh Society and making our Sunday afternoon a little bit interesting in terms rather than just the cold weather we're experiencing right now.
If any of you do make it to North Wales, please give me a call.
Oh, well, we will keep that in mind then.
Take you on a walk.
Where do you call home up in North Wales?
Well, I'm in Caernarfon.
Oh, Caernarfon. You did say that. You did say that. Okay. Well, that's easy. That's easy to remember then.
Yes.
Well, Margaret, it's me again, Susan.
Yes, Susan.
I just want to say that there were several of us at the family reunion with Dylan and Clwyd, where you spoke in, what was it, September?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I don't know, is Sue Sit on today?
I think she's listening.
Okay, well, that was a wonderful day and wonderful program, and thank you for that. So some of us are familiar with, well, myself, I'm familiar with North Wales, but only as a tourist. But it's a beautiful place, and I would encourage everybody on here to visit there.
I think Wayne raised his hand.
I just, a question. I'm hearing Margaret tell me she's interested in your book. I had the impression your books were all in Welsh. Do you have an English edition?
Yeah, so Real Gwynedd
Is
the
in
only
English.
one that's written in English.
Okay.
Yeah. So the archaeology books are in the Welsh language. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't want her buying a Welsh language book.
Oh, no, I could see on the internet, the ones that are in Welsh language books are pretty, is just a few sentences they'll put underneath. It's like, oh, it's in Welsh. So if you're looking on the internet, you'll notice that the write-ups will be right alongside the book. It's a lot of Welsh. So, but Real
Gwynedd is the one if you want to be able to read in English. Yeah.
Well, we thank you very much, Rhys, and
one person
you've given us a wonderful afternoon here, and I know it's evening time for you, so thank you for giving us your evening hours.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you all. And